The arrival of the invincible fleet sky above Earth was quiet for many years. No ships, no signals, no signs of war, no signs of peace. Either Earth was forgotten, left behind in the records of advanced alien civilizations like a blank space on an ancient map. It was the Vorax Empire who finally returned, not to make peace, not to trade, not even to conquer, but to mock. They had seen old human broadcasts full of primitive technology and emotional speeches, and they found it all hilarious. To them, humans were gone, nothing more than dust. Beneath the Starst, Vorax flagship called the Varnic Hammer entered orbit, slowly surrounded by 20 smaller ships, each loaded with warriors, scanners, drones, and recording bots. Their mission was to document Earth's ruins and turn it into a comedy show for the galactic networks. They had done this before on other dead worlds. They enjoyed laughing at failure, and they believed no one failed harder than humanity. They expected broken buildings, rusted machines, and powerless weapons. They were not afraid, they were entertained. Commander Exral of the Vorax stood at the edge of the control bridge, his arms crossed, his eyes glowing with purple energy. His voice echoed through the bridge as he ordered the landing party to go down, scan, collect, and record every piece of ancient junk they could find. He wanted footage of the most pathetic parts of human culture. His crew laughed as the dropships left the flagship and moved toward the surface. The landing site was an old human city, half covered in sand, half buried in vines. The buildings stood like forgotten bones, reaching toward the sky, cracked but still holding their shape. The Vorax troops moved quickly, scanning the area, picking up anything that looked strange to them, which was everything. Even old traffic lights seemed funny to them. They found a place marked with faded letters that read Human Military Museum, entry free, and their laughter increased as they stepped inside it. Museum was dark, silent, full of glass cases and dusty plaques. Everything smelled like time had stopped here. There were uniforms, medals, broken radios, pictures of old battles. But what caught their attention was a small corner labeled World War Relics. Behind the glass was a long object, metal, dark with scratches, and where it was an old human gun, used in one of Earth's early wars, maybe the 20th century. No one knew exactly. One of the soldiers, named Rexer, pointed at it and said, "This looks like something a child would build." The others laughed and began filming it, calling it the toothpick of death and the legendary pea shooter. They made jokes and added cartoon effects in their recordings. Their audience in the fleet above watched the live feed and added laughing emojis and fire reactions. Everyone was enjoying the show of how backward humans were. And Rexer did something no one expected. He opened the case and picked up the gun. He held it with one hand like it was a toy and pointed it at their own dropship parked nearby. He smiled for the camera and said, "This is how humans fought their wars, with sticks and noise." He pulled the trigger, expecting nothing, maybe a clicking sound or a weak puff of smoke, but what followed made the entire galaxy go silent. Gun fired, but not a normal bullet. The front of the gun lit up with golden blue light, and a beam of pure energy shot forward. Not fast, not loud, just a clean, quiet line that touched the dropship, and then the dropship disappeared. It did not explode, it did not burn, it simply vanished from front to back, like being erased from space in 1 second. The Vorax soldiers turned around in shock, eyes wide, mouths open. The camera feed shook as one of them dropped the recording drone by accident. No one spoke for 10 long seconds. The ground was still, the sky above was clear, but something heavy had fallen over them. The fear that this planet was not what it seemed. Rexer dropped the gun, his hands shaking, and stepped back, his voice now trembling, as he asked, "What kind of weapon was that? How did it fire? Why did it work? Who left it here? What else is hiding on this planet?" They all looked around, like the museum itself was alive and watching them far above. In the Vorax flagship, the laughter had stopped. The commander's eyes narrowed as he watched the footage again and again. He ordered full scans of the planet, but the sensors began to return strange data, unknown radiation, old frequencies, once thought silent, now waking up from every corner of the planet. The gun was just the beginning. Earth was not dead, Earth was not backward, Earth was sleeping, and something was starting to wake up. The aliens came to laugh at an old human weapon. They never thought that weapon would laugh back. Shot that shouldn't have worked. The Vorax soldiers stood frozen inside the dusty museum, their feet locked in place, their minds struggling to understand what had just happened. The gun still lay on the floor, glowing faintly like it had just finished breathing. One of the soldiers stepped forward, slowly picked it up again, but now he held it with fear, not amusement. The laughter was gone, the jokes were gone. The dropship outside was not just destroyed, it had vanished from existence, erased like a memory, wiped from time. Commander Exral watched the live feed in silence, his sharp mind already racing through possibilities. He ordered another group of soldiers to land near the first team and begin analysis of the area, especially the weapon itself. He wanted answers immediately. He demanded full energy scans, deep radar readings, molecular breakdown, anything that could explain what they just witnessed as the second team landed near the museum. The air around the city began to shift like a wind that came from nowhere. Back inside the museum, the first team placed the weapon inside a special containment unit, but even then their scanners could not read it. It showed as both active and inactive at the same time. The metal was ancient yet untouched by decay. The energy signature did not match any known weapon type, not plasma, not magnetic, not kinetic. It was something else, something outside their understanding, and that was what truly scared Themon. Of the science officers named Veltra uploaded the data to the flagship. But as soon as the data packet reached orbit, the flagship systems began to behave strangely. Control panels flickered, lights dimmed, and sensors started reporting false positions. Commander Xrel slammed his fist on the console, demanding a reset. But the engineers could not explain what was happening. It was as if the ship was being affected by something from the planet below, something invisible, something old. Veltra continued her tests and noticed something strange. The gun seemed to pulse every few minutes like a heartbeat. When sensed with certain radio frequencies, the pulses would strengthen, and every time they did, a low hum would fill the museum for a few seconds and stop. They tried blocking it, but nothing worked. It was transmitting in a way that bypassed their technology. Like the weapon was talking, not in words, but in rhythms, codes, patterns made for machines that no longer existed, or maybe for minds that no longer needed bodies. In orbit, the Vorax flagship was now on full alert, not because of a direct threat, but because of what they could not understand. All 20 ships had now picked up the same energy pulse echoing from Earth, and the hum was getting louder. Xrel ordered all ships to charge their shields and weapons. He had come here to laugh at human failure. Now he felt like he was standing inside a trap that had taken years to build and decades to activate. Back on the surface, a third group of Vorax soldiers was sent to a nearby human base, ruins filled with broken computers and rusted vehicles. But when they entered the command center, they found screens turning on by themselves, maps lighting up, communication logs playing, old voices of human soldiers from centuries ago. But the voices spoke in calm tones, giving orders like they were in a battle, as if they were not gone, just waiting for the right trigger to wake them up. The soldiers tried to shut it down, but the systems kept restarting. A single phrase appeared again and again on every screen across the base. We are the echoes of Earth. We sleep among stars. We wait for the joke to end, and when it does, we fire again. The soldiers did not know what it meant, but it made them nervous. They pulled back and called the flagship, reporting that human technology was reacting like it was alive. Commander Xrel now faced a decision: to stay or leave, to investigate further or retreat. Before it was too late. He was not a coward, but he was not blind. Either something powerful was buried on Earth, and it was not done waking up. He gave the order for all forces to return to orbit for regrouping, but before the last team could lift off, a shockwave blasted through the sky. All Vorax ships picked up a massive energy spike. From deep beneath the Earth's crust, something was rising. Sky over the city turned golden and split with light like an ancient satellite had activated. High above the clouds, the humans had left behind technology in the sky, buried under the oceans and hidden inside moons, and now that one weapon had fired, it was all starting to come online again. From the museum, the ancient gun gave off one more pulse, and this time it was answered from somewhere far away. A signal bounced back, and then another, and another. Earth was no longer silent. Aliens had fired the first laugh, but humanity had loaded the last bullet long ago. Panic in orbit above Earth. The Vorax fleet floated with power and fear blended together. The mighty warships, which once crossed galaxies without challenge, now stood still in orbit. Their scanners focused on the blue planet below, but their results were strange, confused, inconsistent, like Earth itself was sending fake signals. Or maybe signals too complex to understand. Some ships reported heat signatures rising from abandoned cities. Others detected life, but with no forms, only movement, like ghosts walking through dead streets. And still the old human gun remained the center of everything, its pulse reaching farther. With every hour, Commander Xrel stood in silence before the central command table aboard the Varnic Hammer, his face tense, his hands gripping the edge of the panel, his thoughts clouded by uncertainty. He was not used to feeling unsure. He had crushed rebellions and burned planets into silence. But now an old planet with no military, no visible defense, no voice had begun to haunt the most advanced fleet in the Empire. His officers looked to him for orders, but no one spoke. The room felt colder than usual, and the lights above flickered slightly again and again. The gun's pulse triggered a ripple effect through the orbiting ships affecting sensors, controls, and even communication links. Many believed it was not just a weapon but a key, maybe something older than even their science. Something buried in time and wrapped in human madness to hide its real purpose. Exeril had no time for philosophy. He needed answers. He ordered full scans of the entire solar system. Not just Earth, but also Mars, Europa, Titan, and the asteroid belt. His fear was no longer just the planet, but what the humans might have left behind. Everywhere as the scans began, new signals emerged from Titan, faint but growing. The Vorax probe orbiting Saturn's moon detected an old human object rising from under the ice. It was not large, not bright, not fast, but the energy it gave off was unnatural. It pulsed in perfect sync with the museum weapon. The scientists on board the science vessel Vorax Sight tried to lock on and study it, but the moment they did, their screens went black and all their ship systems reset to factory state. A complete wipe within seconds, and they lost control of their own engines, drifting in silence toward Saturn's rings. Panic spread through the fleet as more ships reported strange malfunctions, weapons going offline, lights blinking in Morse code. Languages none of them recognized, old human languages mixed with binary and sound patterns. Every time they tried to jam the signals, it multiplied and spread like it wanted to be heard. Like it had waited for this moment for a long time. Many younger officers began to whisper that Earth was cursed and that maybe the humans had never been defeated. Maybe they had planned to disappear, not because they lost, but because they were setting a stage in the ground. The Vorax recovery teams near the museum had stopped all operations. They refused to touch the old gun again, and instead stood guard around it like it was alive. They sent more bots inside nearby buildings, hoping to find explanations, manuals, databases, anything that could tell them what had been activated. But the buildings seemed to change inside. Walls shifted, floors bent, maps showed different layouts than what was physically there. It was like the very city was moving under their feet, and they were not exploring but being guided, being shown something step by step, like a performance deep below the city. Inside what looked like an old subway station, the bots discovered a sealed door made of alloy. Unknown to the Vorax Empire, its surface was covered in markings that lit up when scanned. The markings formed a single phrase repeated across the door again and again: "You may forget us, but we remember you." And behind the door was a sound, a low humming that matched the pulse of the gun and the object on Titan, and something else, something hidden. Commander Exeril called for emergency council across all 20 ships. His voice calm, but his heart racing. He told his captains they were now dealing with something far more dangerous than forgotten tech. They were facing a species that had turned the idea of weakness into a weapon, that had made silence louder than war, and had used time as their battlefield. The council argued. Some demanded retreat, some demanded orbital bombardment, others said to destroy the gun at once, but the energy readings showed clearly any direct attack on the gun would trigger an unknown chain reaction that might affect the entire solar system. Then, without warning, every screen across the Vorax fleet turned on at the same time, even those without power, and an old human face appeared, eyes closed, face calm. It was not a live feed, but a recording, old and grainy. The man spoke slowly in English, then in Vorax, then in hundreds of languages, as if the message had been made for every species that might find it one day. The man said, "If you are watching this, then you tried to laugh at our ruins, but let this be your last lesson. We did not build to survive. We built to be remembered, not in stone, not in data, but in Firth." Message ended and the gun pulsed again, and this time it was not a warning, it was a signal. And in the darkness beyond Pluto, something answered, humanity's secret doctrine for beyond Pluto. In the edge of darkness where the Vorax scanners once saw nothing, a silent object began to move. It was not large and it made no sound, but its presence was heavy, like something older than space had opened its eyes again. It was shaped like a broken satellite, burned and blackened with time, but it carried a pulse, the same pulse that came from the ancient human gun, from the object under Titan, and from the sealed door beneath the Earth. It moved slowly, but with purpose, as if answering a call it had been waiting for since the stars were young on board. The Vorax flagship. Commander Exeril stood in the middle of chaos. His crew tried to keep systems stable, but nothing responded. The controls glitched, the maps rotated, the star charts changed their numbers without input, and everywhere that pulse echoed through the ship, through the wires, through their bones. His officers begged him to pull back, to retreat, but he refused. He needed to know what humans had done to the galaxy. What trap had they buried inside their ruins, and how could such a primitive species create fear without even being present back on the surface? The soldiers around the sealed door tried to open it, using force, using code, using plasma drills, but nothing worked. It was not locked in the way they understood it was. Locked by condition, it would only open when the time was right. And then the markings on the door shifted and formed a message: this is not a vault. This is a mirror. Look at it long enough and see yourself burn. The soldier stepped back, afraid, unsure what the door meant by mirror. Was it a warning, or was it a key to something worse above Earth? The ships began detecting old satellites coming online one by one. These were not modern communication devices, they were mechanical eyes from centuries ago, built with materials no longer used and designs lost to time, yet they worked perfectly. And each one beamed the same signal into space. It was not a weapon. It was a story, a data stream carrying a timeline of events from human history, wars, discoveries, betrayals, unity, despair, and hope, and woven through all of it was a doctrine written in thousands of human voices speaking in unison. We disappear, not because we are weak, but because you must think. We read the science deck of the Varnic Hammer. A young Vorik scientist named Carry On decrypted more of the data coming from Earth, and what he found made his skin crawl deep within the core of old human data files. He discovered a document labeled Operation Mirage, and it was marked as forbidden. The contents revealed a plan so large it did not seem possible. The humans had created layers of defense not through force, but through confusion. They built weapons that looked like scrap. They made data that looked like errors. They taught machines to sleep and only wake when mocked by outsiders, and worst of all, they trained artificial minds to think like predators, but act like prey. Until the right moment, Carrion ran to Commander Exerol and showed him the files and the old recordings, and together they realized the truth. Humanity had not lost any war. They had vanished on purpose. They had built a system of revenge, not to destroy but to teach a lesson that would echo for 1,000 years. They had chosen silence so that arrogance would become a trigger, and once triggered, the response would not be loud. It would be slow, invisible, unstoppable. Outside in orbit, the object beyond Pluto finally entered scanner range, and what the Voriks saw made them tremble. It was not a satellite, it was a ship, a human warship covered in ice and black armor, with no engine flare and no visible crew. It moved like it was sliding through time itself. It had no name, no ID, no markings, only a number etched in its side: 13. And as it approached the outer edge of the solar system, every other human relic began to change. The sealed door opened. The gun became silent, and the message across all ships changed again: returned not with fire, but with memory, and that is what you will carry, Commander. Exerol ordered all ships into formation to face the unknown ship approaching, but their engines stalled, their shields refused to activate, and their weapons systems shut down one by one. It was not an attack, it was a choice made by something older than war itself. And then from deep space came a voice, a calm human voice, no anger, no pride, only clarity, and it spoke one line that shook every Voriks. On every ship you saw weakness and you laughed. You fired ignorance and we loaded silence. If ship marked 13 came closer, and every star behind it seemed to dim like light itself was being swallowed not by energy, but by history. And for the first time in his life, Commander Exerol stepped back from the command table, unable to speak, unable to run, unable to fight the return of the forgotten ones. The stars watched in silence as the ship marked 13 moved with slow authority through the black sea of space. No flames, no trails, no noise, only presence. Its surface covered in dark armor chipped with age, and glowing with lines that pulsed like veins. It did not speed up, it did not change direction. It simply came forward with purpose, as if it had never stopped coming since the day humanity vanished. Every Vorik's ship in orbit now floated like leaves around a still lake, their engines dead, their weapons frozen not by force but by design, as if the human systems had spoken a command so old and deep that even advanced alien code obeyed without choice. Inside the Varnic Hammer, Commander Exerol stood without breath, his eyes fixed on the display as the human ship crossed the outer defense ring, which had once protected the flagship. Now it passed without resistance. The computers refused to track its speed, and the crew refused to speak. The voice that had echoed moments ago still lingered in their ears. You saw weakness and you laughed. You fired ignorance and we loaded silence. And now that silence had become heavier than any weapon in the lower levels of the command deck. Carry on. And a team of scientists reviewed the last data packet sent from Earth. They had intercepted a buried signal that activated across all old human outposts in the system, not one, not two, but hundreds deep under Martian dust, beneath the frozen crust of Europa, under the methane seas of Titan, and even inside asteroids near Jupiter. Each site now pulsed with the same rhythm, one beat, one message: humanity is returning, not from ships, not from soldiers, but from memory itself. Carrion discovered another layer of the file labeled Seed Vault Protocol. It was not about food or biology, it was a seed of thought, a memory loop stored in artificial structures. capable of rebuilding human minds over time, using data, emotion, history, and instinct. The humans had not only disappeared, they had planted versions of themselves across the system, not in flesh, but in code, silent copies sleeping inside machines, until the right moment arrived. And now that moment had come, with ship marked 13 finally stopped in the middle of the fleet, not attacking, not sending messages, simply waiting around. At the space began to shift, not physically, but emotionally. The Vorax crew felt pressure in their chests, sorrow they could not explain, guilt they did not understand. Some fell to their knees, others removed their headgear, gasping for air, as if drowning in their own minds. One officer collapsed, shaking, whispering a word none of them recognized in their own language, but later translated to mean reckoning. Back on Earth, the sealed door beneath the museum had fully opened. Behind it, a chamber of light slowly flickered on walls covered in human writing, images of stars, names of ships, names of soldiers, and a single statue stood in the center of the room. It was a man, not in armor, not holding a weapon, but with his arms open and eyes closed, and beneath him, carved into the stone, were the words, "We became ghosts so you could see what fear looks like." The Vorax team inside the chamber fell back, unable to go further. The lights did not burn, but they revealed everything. Emotions, memories, images from the past began to project into the air. Battles, long forgotten, faces full of pain and hope and death and rebirth. The human story played not as history, but as feeling, and every Vorax who watched felt it inside, like living another life in a single second. And then it stopped, and a final message glowed in red: "Welcome home is not for you." Suddenly, in orbit, dozens of ghost ships appeared around the fleet, not appearing from space, but from hiding, as if they had always been there, waiting. Silent black ships with no windows, no signals, no names, only symbols of Earth, each one activated, without fuel, without crew, and without sound. And yet they moved together in perfect coordination, like dancers in a performance older than the stars. The Vorax fleet panicked, but their systems still refused to respond. They were not locked by attack, they were locked by recognition. The human systems knew the Vorax not as enemies, but as witness, and the stars above flickered. And one by one the planets around Earth began to shine, not with sunlight, but with signals. Human satellites, old and forgotten, now broadcast the same song, a low tone mixed with the heartbeat of the gun, the pulse of the door, the hum of the ship marked 13. And the Vorax knew they had seen enough. They had mocked ruins, and now stood in the temple of those ruins. And the gods who built them had returned, not to fight, not to speak, not to forgive, but to remind the galaxy that Earth never left. Inside the Varnic hammer, Commander Exral made one final log entry. His voice calm and heavy, he said, "If this message is found, know that we did not fall to war, we fell to memory. We did not lose to weapons, we lost to warning. And the most dangerous thing we ever did was laugh at a silence we did not understand, or of shadows and ghosts." Vorax fleet floated powerless in the silence of orbit, surrounded by the black shapes of human ghost ships, their surfaces dull and cold, yet alive with lines of light that pulsed like a slow, steady breath. Every ship carried a symbol. From Earth, some an eagle, some a lion, some a single star, all carved into their armor, like marks of old tribes long before the galaxy had known their name. The human presence was not loud, it did not shout or demand, it simply existed, and that was enough to press weight onto the hearts of every alien. Watching from their trapped vessels, Commander Exral stood rigid in the command hall of the Varnic hammer, his crew moving slowly as if trapped in a dream. They whispered to each other in low tones, afraid to speak louder than the hum that now filled the entire fleet. The hum came not from space, not from engines, but from inside their own systems. The ghost ships were speaking without words, and the Vorax ships were listening without choice. Exral could feel the message, though it was not in language, it was in memory. Like walking into a room you had never seen yet somehow remembered. The surface of Earth, the museum stood unchanged yet different. The old human gun no longer glowed, it sat quiet like before, yet the soldiers who dared to look at it felt their skin tighten, their breath shorten. They could not shake the feeling that the weapon was still watching them, even without sound or movement. The sealed door beneath the city now stood wide open, and from its depths came a faint breeze, not of air, but of thought, images pressing into minds, uninvited visions of battles where human ships fought in black space against shapes the Vorax had never seen, shapes far worse than themselves. The visions told a story of survival, not through victory, but through patience, through turning weakness into a mask and letting arrogance be the rope that pulled enemies into the trapped ghost ships began to move, not in attack patterns, but in a slow circle around the Vorax fleet, their movements so perfectly in sync that it felt unnatural, each step of the rotation bringing a different ship face to face with a different Vorax vessel, as if studying them one by one. There Lights flickered and each flicker sent another wave through the alien systems. Navigation wiped, targeting scrambled engines put into a locked state. Some ships tried to send distress calls to the Empire far beyond the system, but their signals vanished as soon as they left the antenna, as if swallowed by the dark. Then from the blackness near Saturn, a new presence emerged, larger than the ghost ships, a vessel shaped like a spear, its body thin and long, its tip glowing faintly like a coal about to ignite. It carried no weapons that the Vorks could see, yet its mere arrival made the ghost ships shift aside, creating a path toward the flagship. Exral gripped the rail of the command deck as the spear-shaped vessel stopped just outside the viewing range, and a single pulse passed through space into every ship, into every mind, a pulse that carried not words but feelings, the sensation of being judged without mercy, without malice, simply measured. In that moment, carry on, the young scientist began piecing together the final truth from the fragments of human data they had collected. The doctrine was not just about hiding strength or waiting for arrogance to trigger. It was about control of the battlefield before it even began. The humans had turned the entire solar system into a weapon without a single visible gun. They could blind ships, choke communications, shut down engines, and plant visions in the minds of their enemies, until those enemies were already defeated before the first shot. The war of shadows and ghosts was not about fighting. It was about removing the will to fight. Spear ships sent another pulse, and the ghost ships broke formation, spreading across the fleet, moving faster than anything the Vorks had seen. They did not fire missiles or beams, they simply passed near each alien ship. And as they did, the ships went dark, every light, every screen, every hum gone, leaving only the sound of breath and heartbeats. The crews sat in darkness, waiting for an end that never came. And then one by one their systems returned, but stripped of weapons, stripped of navigation, stripped of any path to escape. They were left drifting above Earth. Like trophies from the surface, a light rose into the sky, a thin beam from the museum reaching toward the spear ship. And in the beam was an image, a human hand opening palm forward as if to say enough. The ghost ships halted, the hum faded, and silence returned, real silence, the kind that made every Vorks on every ship feel smaller than they had ever felt before. Commander Exral knew this was the moment of decision, not for him, but for the humans. They could end the fleet now, or they could let it leave. But either way, the Vorks Empire would never again look at Earth with laughter. In the command hall, the screens lit once more, and the same human face from before appeared, eyes open this time, voice steady and calm. You will leave and you will tell them we were never gone. And then the face vanished. The ghost ships turned toward the dark, and the spear ship began to drift away into the endless black, taking with it the hum, the pulse, and the invisible weight that had been crushing the fleet, leaving only the lesson behind. The last laugh as human spear ship moved deeper into the dark, beyond the sight of the Vorks fleet, its long shadow slipping into the endless black. Like a memory returning to the place it was born, the ghost ships followed one by one until the space above Earth was empty of their forms, leaving only the silent alien vessels adrift in helpless orbit. Their engines cold, their weapons useless, their pride crushed. Commander Exral stood in the center of the Varnak Hammer's command deck, and for the first time in his long career he could not think of a single order to give. He stared at the planet below and felt as if the very air around him had grown heavy with the weight of something far older and far wiser than his empire. Crew moved slowly, as if afraid to disturb the silence, every officer keeping their eyes low, the younger ones breathing in shallow gasps, the older ones avoiding each other's gaze. The hum that had haunted them for hours was gone, yet its echo seemed to remain inside their bones, and none could shake the image of the human face that had appeared on their screens, eyes open, voice calm, telling them they were never gone. The message was not just a warning, it was a scar carved deep into the minds of all who had heard it. On the surface of Earth, the museum stood in the same stillness as when the Vorks had first arrived, yet now it felt different. The dust seemed heavier, the shadows longer, the ancient gun sat on its stand, no longer glowing, but not entirely still either. There was a strange tension in the air around it, like a sleeping predator choosing to rest rather than hunt. The soldiers who had guarded it since their rival avoided looking at it directly. Some swore they could hear faint clicks like metal shifting even when no one touched it. The sealed door beneath the city remained open, but its lights had dimmed to a faint red, as if to say the performance was over for now. Carrion, the young scientist, remained deep in the archives of the Varnak Hammer, studying the fragments of human data they had collected. His hands moved over the console slowly, not from fatigue, but from caution, as if he feared the files might reach back at him through the screen. What he found in the last hours before the ghost ships left changed the way he saw the galaxy. He discovered records not of battles, but of conversations between human leaders from centuries ago, speaking about the future not in terms of years or even centuries, but in terms of cycles. The humans had understood that empires rose and fell like tides, and that the greatest power was not in conquering, but in surviving the fall and returning. When the tide turned again, Dvorak's fleet received a single transmission from the spear ship before it vanished fully into the deep. It was not a threat, not a demand, simply a file. The file contained a video of the moment. The Dvorak's soldiers had first mocked the ancient gun, their laughter, their taunts, the jokes they had sent to the galactic networks. And then it showed the gun firing, the dropship vanishing, the soldiers' faces turning from joy to shock to fear, and finally the footage slowed and froze on the moment of silence after the shot. Then the words appeared across the screen: "Never underestimate Earth again." The file repeated itself 3 times, and then erased itself from every system, leaving no copy, only the memory in the minds of those who had seen it. Commander Exerl ordered the fleet to prepare for departure, though none of the ships could move without assistance. The human systems released control slowly, one by one, until basic navigation returned enough for them to set a course. Out of the system, the engines lit weakly like tired animals limping home, and as they began to move away from Earth, a final signal came from the planet below, a deep low tone that resonated through the hulls of their ships. Not painful, not threatening, just there, a reminder that they were leaving, not because they chose to, but because they were allowed to. As the blue sphere of Earth shrank in their view screens, Carry On stood beside Exerl and asked if they would report the truth to the Empire. Exerl did not answer for a long time, his eyes still fixed on the fading planet. Finally he said, "We will report what we saw, but not what we felt." No one would believe it, and even if they did, they would not understand. And with that he turned away, leaving Carry On to wonder if that silence was the final weapon of humanity, the one that ensured the story would spread not as an official report, but as a whispered legend told in fear across the Starshwan. The Dvorak's fleet finally crossed the outer edge of the system. The stars seemed brighter, the hum gone completely, yet the crew knew they carried something with them that would not fade. They had not been destroyed, but they had been defeated in a way no battle could achieve. They had been made to see themselves through the eyes of a species that had mastered patience and turned it into power. Far behind them on Earth, the museum lights flickered once more. The gun gave a single quiet pulse, and somewhere deep underground the sealed door began to close slowly, the red lights fading into darkness as if the planet itself was going back to sleep. The show was over, but the stage remained ready, waiting for the next audience, arrogant enough to laugh at what they did not understand. And in the still air of that quiet place, the last laugh belonged to the humans, and it would last forever. The human spear ship faded into the deep black, beyond the reach of Dvorak's scanners, its shape merging with the silence of space, as though it had never been there. Yet the absence it left behind was heavier than its presence had ever been. The ghost ships followed in perfect sequence, vanishing one by one until nothing remained but the helpless Dvorak's vessels suspended above Earth, powerless and stripped of pride. The stars seemed to lean closer, as if watching to see what the survivors would do. Commander Exerl stood still in the command deck of the Varnic Hammer, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him, heavier than any battlefield he had ever stood. Upon the crew moved in slow, deliberate motions, as though any sound or sudden gesture might wake something they did not want to see again. The silence inside the ship was alive, breathing through the tension in every corner. The hum that had dominated the fleet for so long was gone, yet its ghost lingered in the bones of the soldiers and officers. No one spoke about the human face that had looked directly at them, with eyes open and a voice calm and unshaken, saying they were never gone, but everyone felt it in their hearts and knew they would carry it beyond this system and Earth. The museum looked exactly as it had when the first alien boots touched its dust-filled floors. The old human gun sat on its stand, unmoving and quiet, but no one dared step near it anymore, for even without glow or sound it seemed aware, like a resting predator with its eyes half closed. The sealed door under the city remained open, yet dim, the red light from its depths now faint, as if the planet itself had exhaled in relief after a performance well executed. The air above the city was still, yet beneath that stillness was the tension of a coiled spring. In the archives of the flagship Carry On, sifted through the final layers of human code left behind in their systems, he found pieces of conversations from human leaders speaking centuries before these moments, their words calm and precise, discussing the future, not as a line, but as a circle predicting the rise of arrogance in younger empires and the deliberate choice to hide so well that discovery would feel like triumph before it became defeat. Humanity had turned the galaxy into a stage and had built their survival not through constant war, but through the careful planting of fear and memorized Vorex received one last transmission from the human spear ship before it disappeared into the dark. The file played automatically across every screen. It began with the footage of the soldiers laughing at the ancient gun, their mocking words, their theatrical gestures, broadcast to the Empire for entertainment, and then it slowed to the moment the trigger was pulled. The moment the dropship vanished from existence, the sound fell away, and only the shocked faces of the soldiers remained frozen in time. Then words appeared: never underestimate Earth again. The message repeated 3 times, and erased itself from every system, leaving no trace but the burning memory in the minds of all who had seen it. Earl ordered the fleet to prepare for departure. Their engines were slowly returned by the human systems as if permission was being granted. Navigation came back in fragments and shields remained dead. The movement of the ships felt like the reluctant steps of prisoners released without understanding why. As they turned to leave Earth, a final signal came from the surface, a deep resonant tone that moved through the metal of their ships into the marrow of their bones. Not an attack, not a farewell, simply a reminder that they were leaving not by choice, but by Alawan. Zakarian stood beside his commander as the blue sphere of Earth began to shrink in the viewscreens and asked if they would speak the truth of what they had seen. When they returned to the Empire, Exeral waited a long moment before answering, and when he did his words were heavy. We will speak of what happened, but not of what it meant. No one will believe us, and those who do will never understand. He turned and walked away, leaving Carry-On to stare at the fading planet and wonder if this silence was humanity's sharpest weapon, one that could cut deeper than any blade. When the fleet crossed the boundary of the system, the darkness ahead felt wider than before. The stars seemed sharper, the void colder. The hum was gone, but the crew knew they carried something unseen, a shadow in the mind, a story too sharp to tell plainly. And far behind them on the quiet Earth, the museum lights flickered once more. The ancient gun released a single pulse as if marking the end of a chapter, and deep underground the great door began to close, its light fading to nothing. The air still as stone. The planet slept again, waiting for the next to come and laugh. And